What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Chris Fedor, cleveland.com Cavs beat reporter, and he's joining us from Orlando, Florida, where he got to see the Magic walk away with a 128-122 victory over the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Chris, the standings are starting to switch up directly underneath our feet. Obviously, the Cleveland Cavaliers still maintain the number 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. And for a couple of weeks now, we've had the conversation about who the potential future playoff matchups could be with this Cavs team. And we've looked a little bit further than the Eastern Conference first round. Now, that conversation is starting to look a little bit more different, with the Orlando Magic jumping in to the number 5 seed, and obviously the number 5, 6, and 7 seed being just a half a game apart currently. What did you learn about a potential first round matchup against the Orlando Magic and how the Cavs could fare in that kind of 7-game series?
I think the only team with Jason Tatum healthy now for the Boston Celtics and back in the lineup, I think the only team that can beat the Cavs 4 times in 7 tries is this version of the Boston Celtics. But Orlando would test the Cavs. Orlando would push the Cavs. They're long, they're athletic, they're physical. They can suddenly shoot and score. They scored 128 tonight. Now, part of that was the Cavs were missing Jarrett Allen, a big component of their defense. The other part of that was the Cavs couldn't contain dribble penetration. The other part of that was the Cavs couldn't stop fouling, so they kept sending Orlando to the line. But this is what Orlando kind of envisioned when they brought in Desmond Bane. Somebody else to take some pressure off of Paolo and Franz, somebody else to provide spacing, late game playmaking, late game shooting. And you saw all of that from the Magic. So I do think, anytime we talk about whether or not a team makes it to the NBA Finals, whether or not a team wins the NBA championship, there is an element of luck. There is an element of the road that you have to travel and what kinds of opponents do you have to face on that journey to a championship, at least a potential championship. And I think everybody would say that they want the easiest road possible. Like, yeah, there's some aspect of it. We got challenged. We found a way to beat that challenge. And there is a mental lift. There is a psychological lift that comes with that. But I think you want the easiest road possible. You want the fewest number of impediments. And the Cavs aren't going to say this publicly. They never would. They don't have any reason to fear a first-round playoff opponent. They're the number 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. They were, before Jason Tatum came back, the betting favorite to win the Eastern Conference. They did trade for James Harden at the trade deadline, and they're a very different team because of that and the addition of Dennis Schroeder and Keon Ellis. But it would take a lot out of the Cavs playing against Orlando. It would push the Cavs. It would be more of a test than maybe they would want in the first round, especially with what could be waiting in the second round and beyond, depending on how the bracket lines up. So if you have your choice and you're the Cavs, you get Toronto in round 1, you get Miami in round 1, or you get Orlando. Which is the tougher road? The tougher road is Orlando. I think a lot of people would say that, despite the fact that they haven't been the team that a lot of people expected them to be this year. It seems like they're starting to round into form. It seems like they're starting to figure things out. And we've already talked about the stylistic complications of playing against a team like Orlando. They're tough, they're physical, they're grabby, they don't back down, they have multiple creators, they have length, they have athleticism, they have enough three-point shooting. So I think Orlando would be a tough matchup for the Cavs in the first round. Not that the Cavs would lose the series against Orlando, but it would be a tough matchup in the first round. And you probably don't want to be that kind of uncertain about the Cavs winning a series that early into a playoff run.
Chris, you mentioned the potential for luck to play into the factor of getting deeper into the playoffs, and that's absolutely true. Then the other factor is health. and being able to maintain a certain level of reliability through a 7-game series with your roster, with your rotations, with your lineups, and all the things that you've been working through the past 82 games, or for the Cavs since James Harden and Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder got here. If the Cavs were to have to play the Orlando Magic in a 7-game series in the first round, that would be physical, that would be testing, that would be challenging, but it would also be the most likely place, again, looking back to a couple years ago where Jarrett Allen got injured in that series. We have to see all these different things and how these players are going to respond. Then pair that with a potential second round matchup with the Detroit Pistons. Another physical, grabby, not trying to injure anybody. There's a likelihood of those kinds of things because of the style of basketball that they play. But I want to focus on the first round really quickly because we've seen the teams below them. And obviously, in recent history, we understand that the physicality can pose a problem for the Cavs. The other portion of this, Chris, the Toronto Raptors have a style of play that can also challenge the Cavs with their speed, with their ability to attack in the mid range, to get down the floor, and obviously also use their dribble drive penetration and create from there as well. And their pure speed and Scotty Barnes and all the things that he does on the offensive end are going to be challenging. So I do think that we can no longer simply look away from these first round series and try and project who the Cavs are going to face in the second round or in the Eastern Conference Finals because, again, it's one series at a time. And I don't think we can disrespect the game of basketball in that way. And we understand that there's different factors, as we've mentioned already on this podcast, that could alter a series dramatically, just simply if one thing were not to go the Cavs' way.
I'll say this, Ethan, no matter who it is, the Cavs have to find a way to defend better than what they have been. And look, Jarrett Allen missing is a big component to what the Cavs do defensively. Donovan Mitchell talked about it after the game tonight against Orlando, saying that their schemes have changed, the things that they're trying to do defensively, those things have changed as well because you don't have Jarrett Allen in there. They went to the two bigs at the beginning of the fourth quarter with Evan Mobley and Thomas Bryant to kind of combat some of that stuff that Orlando was doing in terms of just relentlessly attacking the paint over and over and over again. And if guys were going to keep getting beat off the dribble at the point of attack, Kenny Atkinson felt like at the beginning of the fourth quarter, he needed two bigs to erase those mistakes to cover up those weaknesses. So we've seen what the Cavs can theoretically be with both Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley there and what that means for their defense. And Kenny was obviously trying to replicate that at the beginning of the fourth quarter. Obviously, Thomas Bryant's not Jarrett Allen, but the idea is similar as well. So to not have Jarrett Allen in this particular matchup against this particular team, the Cavs felt that. There just was not a lot of resistance. There just was not that wall around the paint. There were more second chance opportunities for Orlando than probably what it should have been. So you can't discuss this and the defensive issues that the Cavs had tonight, giving up 128 to the Magic. You can't do that without mentioning that Jarrett wasn't there. In saying that, we have been waiting collectively for the Cavs to find this different level of defense, where they're a top 10 defense, they're a top 5 defense, where they can consistently lean into the defense, maybe consistently rely on their defense to potentially win games for them. It just hasn't happened. And it doesn't matter who's there, who's not there. It doesn't matter what the personnel is based on before trade deadline, after trade deadline. The Cavs have yet to find that defensive identity that they've been searching for throughout the entire season. They scored 122 tonight. That should be enough, but it wasn't enough. So even on nights when Jarrett Allen's not there, the Cavs have to play with a different level of physicality. The Cavs still have to take pride on the defensive end of the floor. The Cavs have to provide resistance at the point of attack. And if they're going to play Orlando in round 1, if they're going to play Boston in round 2, defensively, when you play against these kinds of opponents, defensively, you just have to be better than what the Cavs have shown throughout most of this season.
And Chris, that's exactly where I was going to go with it next. The defensive end of the floor. And I'm glad that you put that caveat out there before we dove in split because I think you're absolutely right. Jarrett Allen is one of the key contributors on both ends of the floor for the Cavs, especially in the second half of the season, but on the defensive end, more than anything else, that the Cavs have needed him to be as a initial deterrent, especially for drivers. And I think that's one of the biggest areas that the Cavs have failed this season is on point of attack defense, allowing opposing offenses to get to their dribble drives, get by, and find creative ways to get to the lane, and then either creating from there or finishing at the rim. Obviously, the finishing at the rim comes easier when you don't have Jarrett Allen out there. But Chris, that's the other portion of this is we're seeing the non-reliability of the defense impacting how the other players that are playing off the ball. You have Donovan Mitchell in the corner not guarding some key shooters because he's watching the play, trying to come help on different drives because he's not guarding the guys that are having the ball in their hands on that end of the floor. And then that creates an overhelp, an overreaction, and either the initial man that is wide open in the corner gets the ball, or they create a drive kick swing series and you find someone on the wing or at the top of the key that is wide open. I'm not saying that this Cavs team has relied too much on Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen in the past because I think they understand the back wall that you mentioned that they have there. But it feels like the change of defensive principles this season has not only resulted in a change of mindset from Evan and Jarrett, but also a change of mindset of the responsibilities of those point of attack defenders. And you could say that the Cavs went and picked up better point of attack defenders for the scheme that Kenny Atkinson wants to run, but still, it hasn't been as successful as they would have hoped. So, Chris, I pose the question to you: is Cleveland's defensive system simply broken, and do they have to revert to the defensive principles that JB Bickerstaff was running that helped them be a top contender on that end of the floor on a yearly basis?
Look, JB's a better defensive coach than Kenny Atkinson. And Kenny Atkinson's a better offensive coach than JB Bickerstaff. So they're just not going to do JB Bickerstaff things in a Kenny Atkinson system because JB's no longer here. Kenny has his way of doing things defensively. He has certain principles that he believes in. He likes to switch. He likes to play smaller. He likes quickness, agility, things along those lines. So I don't think there's any reason to think that Kenny's all of a sudden drastically going to change his thinking. Not this deep into the season, and certainly not going into the playoffs. They've been working on something all season long, trying to find that particular identity. So he's just not going to turn into JB Bickerstaff overnight. It's just not going to happen. But for the Cavs, like, to be middle of the pack defensively, whether it's all season long or post All-Star, which is the reality of where they are right now, it's just not good enough. And I think at times, Ethan, some of it was a personnel issue. Lonzo Ball was struggling defensively. DeAndre Hunter was struggling defensively in certain ways that he was deployed. Obviously, the Darius Garland thing, we don't have to talk about that over and over and over again. For much of the season, Evan Mobley didn't look like the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. Didn't look like somebody who was going to repeat as Defensive Player of the Year. Jarrett Allen was battling 2 busted fingers at various points, and he wasn't the same force defensively that he had been. So at various points, you felt like there were some personnel-related issues that were causing them to be what they were defensively. And then it felt like the Cavs addressed those. And even after doing that, they're still middle of the pack defensively. Keon Ellis is disruptive. Keon Ellis is handsy. Keon Ellis gets steals and blocks. Dennis Schroeder is a pest. He picks up guys 94 feet. Dean Wade is statistically one of the best defenders, one of the most impactful defenders in the NBA. I think it's fair for you to bring up the scheme as a potential problem for this team. I just don't know what good it's going to do to talk about it because I can't imagine it changing. Just don't see Kenny making those drastic changes from a system that he believes in, from a system that he has spent the entire regular season trying to refine and build. So at some point, yeah, you can talk about that and you can point to those potential issues. But the scheme is going to be the scheme, and now it's up to the players to execute that particular scheme at the highest level. And I also think the reality of this team, because they don't have a ton of size. They just don't have a ton of size, not playable size. They do when they play both bigs together. But there were times tonight against Orlando that they were playing Dean at the 5. And Kenny's been dabbling with that in the second half of the season, I think, to try and figure out the viability of it. And we've also talked about downsizing and playing whoever it is as the power forward, the de facto power forward. Is it Jaylon Tyson? Is it Keon Ellis? Is it James Harden in certain lineup variations? So I think against certain teams, not every team can exploit this, but there is a fundamental roster flaw that the Cavs have. And it doesn't mean that they can't overcome it, but it is an obvious weak point. It is a lack of size. The 3/4 spot continues to be one that teams are trying to attack, that teams feel like they can create an advantage. So I think at some point, yes, the players just have to say, you know what? We got to give more effort at the point of attack. We've got to be more disciplined on our closeouts. We've got to pay attention to the scouting report a little bit better. Attention to detail needs to be better. But I do think there are going to be some disadvantages that the Cavs have defensively because of their lack of size that's going to cause some kinds of issues similar to what we have seen against Boston, against Orlando here, against those kinds of teams that are capable of exploiting that.
I think there is a different aspect of what the Cavs have been doing recently that could be changed. Chris, this is another game throughout the beginning portions of the season. This was happening where the Cavs challenge early in games and it has cost them down the stretch. And it happened again tonight in Orlando as there was clear potential game altering calls being made that were either missed or unreviewable because the Cavs had used, even if they won them, the challenges that they had, the 2 challenges that they have before the 4th quarter. Chris, I'm curious, do you think that, one, the Cavs need to change their thinking throughout the game to not challenge in the 1st or 2nd quarter to make sure that they have these challenges available? And 2, rule be changed to if the reviewing team is successful, that they continue to maintain that challenge throughout the game. Because I think 2 challenges make sense. But if you have the opportunity to get a successful challenge and then you are kind of penalized for getting it right, that doesn't necessarily make sense to me.
I get where you're coming from. Donovan Mitchell mentioned this post game. I asked Donovan specifically, as players, do you have to stop demanding challenges from your coach early in the game so that he can keep them in his back pocket? And Donovan said it may be something that he considers moving forward, but they were right on both of their challenges. So it's hard to criticize too much. It's just I think if there's anything Kenny has to do and his video crew have to do is they have to try and find a way to assess the value of winning a particular challenge that early in the game and using their challenge that early in the game. Because I just don't think you can get into a situation, Ethan, where you can change the rule and you just have unlimited challenges, where you just get all of these challenges. Every time you get successful, you get another one rewarded to you. I just think that's too much. It would just be too challenge happy. So I think there could be something that is changed with the rule of if you get both of your challenges right, you get one extra one. You get a third, kind of like a bonus challenge. Maybe that's something that this league explores in the off season. But I do think that the thing that the Cavs can control, because we have to deal with the rules that are in place here, I do think they have to be more cognizant of when they use the challenge and what kind of value they're getting from the challenge. Tonight, it was an obvious miscall where James Harden had the ball swiped out of his hand and it went out of bounds, and it should have been Cavs basketball. That's what it should have been ruled on the floor. It was not. It was ruled Orlando basketball. I understand wanting to challenge that because it was an egregious miss. But what was the benefit of that? How much did the Cavs benefit from that? And I just think more times than not in competitive games, and there's no way to predict what the outcome's going to be, and there's no way to predict whether it's going to be a competitive game that goes into clutch time or anything along those lines. But more times than not, these competitive games, you would prefer to keep that challenge as long as possible. And using 2 as early as Kenny did, whether he was right or wrong, and in this case, he was right on both of them. Both of those calls were overturned. I just don't think the Cavs benefited enough, and I just don't think the value of winning those challenges was enough to warrant using both of them at the time of the game that the Cavs did. So if there is one thing that they can control, I do think it's the timing of when to use them. And sometimes if you're Kenny, you say, I might win this, but what am I gaining from it? And if you're Kenny, sometimes you have to tell the player, like, I get it. You're probably right. This probably would be overturned, but sometimes I have to pocket these things. Sometimes these games come down to the final 2 minutes where you would prefer to have a specific play reviewed then, where you feel like there's more consequence and there's more benefit to it. So I understand Donovan's frustration. I understand a lot of fans were probably wondering the same thing. It probably would have been nice for the Cavs to have a couple of reviews down the stretch from their standpoint on the Dennis Schroeder play, maybe on one of the Donovan Mitchell plays. There was another play that Donovan mentioned. I don't know that I really fully agreed with it in real time. If you think back to, the Detroit game, the Jarrett Allen call, think about the consequences of that. Think about the value retained if you would have had a challenge in that case, if you're the Cavs, and that thing gets overturned. Maybe it turns into a win instead because Jarrett's out there instead of on the bench watching. So the frustration is obvious. And look, the Cavs were frustrated with the officials all night long. Kenny Atkinson was frustrated with the officials all night long. But I think there was enough evidence to say that this game was probably going to come down to the stretch, and having that challenge probably would have been a little bit more beneficial. So I do think the Cavs have to really, really monitor the timing of using these challenges. And if it's so early into the game, maybe you just let it slide. You take your emotions out of it as best you can, and you say, you know what? We're just going to let this one slide. At least, at least the second one. If you use one and you get it overturned and you're right, okay, but be a little bit more judicious.
You're absolutely right. And this is something that the Cavs need to be able to refine in the final 16 games of the season, because obviously you can't go into a 7 game series not knowing what your strategy is going to be, especially when we're talking about a 7 game series that can be shifted by one call or one non call that the Cavs need to be reviewable. It's important for this Cavs team to not only have structure when it comes to their combinations, their lineups, their rotations, but also just their plans going in for each matchup that they might have. As we talked about earlier on this podcast, a first round matchup against Toronto, against Orlando, how their principles shift because of the different mindset, the different principles that those teams have. Obviously, Orlando wanted to be more physical. Obviously, Toronto wanting to run and get out more and transition. They need to have an understanding of how they want to attack and approach each game, each night, or just each series, so that the players, that the coaches are all on the same page with all of that in mind. But Chris, I don't want to hold you too much longer. So would you like to talk about Jaylon Tyson's lack of minutes in the fourth quarter, or would you like to talk about the severity behind Evan Mobley's missed free throws to finish today's podcast?
I mean, the Jalen thing is interesting, but I think Kenny's just going to have to make these kinds of difficult choices as we come down the stretch of the regular season and as he starts to prepare for what's ahead in the playoffs. And unless you're Donovan Mitchell, James Harden, maybe Evan Mobley, minutes just aren't going to be guaranteed in the fourth quarter. Starting jobs are probably going to fluctuate depending on who's going to be available and stuff like that. So I think Kenny was frustrated at times with Jalen throughout the course of the game, and he decided to go more with Keon Ellis. And if Keon Ellis is going to make as many threes as he made, and he's going to be as disruptive as he was, obviously they wanted Sam shooting and his movement and stuff like that. It's just that particular spot. You can call it the fifth player in the closing five. You can say starting small forward, starting power forward, whatever it may be, that spot I think is just going to continue to fluctuate. And I don't know that there's going to be a level of consistency when it comes to who the closing group is going to be. And Kenny's been hinting at that for the last couple of weeks, but his actions are dictating that he's going based on feel. He's going based on matchup. He's going based on situation. He's going based on who's playing well. And I don't think anybody could sit there and say that Keon Ellis wasn't playing well, that he didn't deserve to close out that game with the big shots that he was making, with the disruption that he was causing on the defensive end of the floor. So it's going to be James Harden. It's going to be Donovan Mitchell. It's going to be Evan Mobley. And it's who are those other two guys? Sometimes it might be Sam Merrill and Jaylon Tyson. Sometimes it might be Dean Wade and Keon Ellis. Sometimes it might be Keon Ellis and Jarrett Allen. Those two other spots in the closing lineup, I just feel like there's probably not going to be a lot of consistency there. And we're probably down the stretch going to see more times in the fourth quarter where Jaylon Tyson's just not out there. Or maybe Sam Merrill's not out there. Or maybe Jarrett Allen is not out there. So I think it's all part of Kenny trying to figure these things out. And I think from a fan's perspective, it's probably frustrating because he's figuring these things out on the fly, and there could be consequences for some of these decisions that he makes. But it's the only thing that he can do, given a lot of the lineup changes that he's been forced into making throughout the course of the season, given a lot of the inconsistency from the team and the inconsistency of who's been available, who's not been available. Hey, look, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that when Max Strus comes back and his return feels imminent at this point, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that there are some games further down the road, not immediately, further down the road, where maybe he's in the closing lineup too. Because I don't think at this point, Ethan, I don't think Kenny knows what his best five-man lineup is. I don't think he does, because I just don't know that there's enough data. If you're the Charlotte Hornets, you know who your best five-man lineup is. You've basically been together all season long. If you're the Orlando Magic and you're fully healthy, you probably have an understanding of who your best five-man lineup is. If you're Boston and you're fully healthy and Jason Tatum is back like he is, you have a better idea of who your best five-man lineup is. I think Kenny is still trying to figure that out. I think he's still trying to work through that. And tonight was another example of that, as Jaylon Tyson was just sitting over there on the bench.
Yeah, and we've talked about the Jaylon Tyson situation at length. We had a completely separate podcast dedicated to Kenny Atkinson saying that Jaylon Tyson had to kind of re-earn his minutes, especially with these new acquisitions who play a similar position to him. And while it was evident that Jaylon Tyson was on the bench for the entire fourth quarter, it's also been evident that his opportunities, his spurts throughout the last couple of weeks have been shorter. And unless he's had a breakout game, he's been resorted to again, role player, right? And before the trades, it was seeming more and more likely like Jaylon Tyson was going to be pivotal to whatever the Cavs were going to do in the playoffs. And while he still could have that role, especially against the Boston Celtics, as we mentioned on a previous podcast, I do think that his role is changing and Kenny Atkinson is asking less of him. And even when Dennis Schroeder was struggling in tonight's game, those minutes didn't directly go to Jaylon Tyson. He was not asked to be the secondary creator, the secondary ball handler in those situations. He was still asked to set screens, make shots, defend, minimize mistakes. And when he didn't minimize mistakes, that leash got short and he was pulled from the game almost immediately. So I definitely think it's not necessarily unfair based on what he was able to do in the beginning of the season, but I do think as a second-year player, it is hard mentally to go through that, to have your role fluctuated so significantly from what you were able to accomplish with Donovan Mitchell and Kenny Atkinson talking about you potentially being a $20 million or more player per year. And then now you're resorted to someone who's on the bench watching the game, and if you make one mistake, you're immediately pulled from the game. So I do think that this is going to be a challenge for Jaylon Tyson, someone who is mentally strong, but is still learning the NBA and what is being asked of him. And I think that is going to be a very big X factor and potential series turning feature when we talk about his confidence, his reliability in a 7-game series, and then also looking at how Kenny Atkinson believes in him, especially when he's going to get his first taste of true NBA playoff minutes. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and subscribe to Subtext, where you can interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy directly to your phones. So the only way to do so is signing up for a 14-day free trial or visiting cleveland.com/Cavs and clicking on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.